Welcome to Small Cap Nation. I'm Jane King in one of the many New York City bars that contribute to the multi-billion-dollar alcohol industry. Now, believe it or not, booze wasn't always legal, and experts say the next big multi-billion-dollar industry could be, you guessed it, cannabis. We're going to take an in-depth look at how changing laws are making this growing sector more mainstream, not just for consumers, but also investors.
I'm Patricia Wu. If you've never heard of Diego Pellicer, get ready. Their execs say soon that name could be as well known as Starbucks, complete with cafes like this on many street corners. But their brand isn't premium coffee, it's premium marijuana. But before cannabis can move from the street corner to the cafe, it's not dealers, but lawyers, lobbyists, judges, and voters clearing the way for the cannabis revolution.
I'm talking about marijuana. You may have heard of it. You may have seen someone smoking it, like those burnout bohemians or that crazy-eyed custodian at your school. You may have taken a toke or two. But do you know the whole story? Do you know the blunt truth?
Cannabis has come a long way since the 1970s in both quality and public opinion. Now, this plant that is still illegal at the federal level has been and is used by millions, not only for medical but recreational purposes. But as more states vote to legalize the popular plant, let's give you a brief history lesson. Cannabis goes all the way back to biblical times with references in the Bible and other cultures, but we'll fast forward to the 20th century. Just after the turn of the century, cannabis and alcohol were as legal as Coca-Cola. But in 1910 and the years that followed, prohibitionist sentiment took over the U.S., and states started to pass laws that made both marijuana and alcohol illegal. Of course, it didn't stop the use of either product, and the multi-million-dollar underground economy was booming. We all know how the story ends. In 1933, booze was legalized again, but cannabis was forced to stay in the shadows. 30 years later, in the 60s and 70s, the hippie generation, Vietnam, Grateful Dead, all helped bring the plant back out of the shadows, and it became part of our popular culture, but still very illegal. It wasn't users, but scientists that started to turn the public sentiment. In their labs, they discovered medical proof that marijuana could be used to treat a variety of illnesses. In '78, New Mexico was the first state to pass a law recognizing the medical value of cannabis. That same year, Robert Randall, afflicted by glaucoma, successfully won his federal court case that declared that Randall's use of the drug was in fact a medical necessity. That led to the big breakthrough, where in 1991, California becomes the first state to legalize medical cannabis, and that set the stage for today. 23 states have now legalized medical marijuana. 4 states, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Alaska, have legalized it for recreational use. And according to the Wall Street Journal, another 9 states, including California, are expected to pass similar laws. So the shift is happening, and besides the strong consumer demand, there's another compelling reason why states are changing laws: money. Colorado has generated $700 million in taxable sales. If the U.S. legalized marijuana as a whole, as much as $3 billion in tax revenue could be generated every year. Plus, it's not only money, but jobs. One study estimates that 250,000 U.S. jobs could be created, and it's jobs that cannot be outsourced. Jobs that will not only help produce and distribute, but also help regulate the industry and make it safer to use. Finally, as public opinion and state laws change, the last piece of the puzzle is the federal laws, which lawyers and lobbyists for the cannabis industry are working hard to change. When that happens, 100-plus year prohibition will officially have come to an end. We're here with Alan Valdez, the chairman of Diego, a cannabis company, to hear all about this very interesting, burgeoning industry.
2016, next year, a big election here in the United States, presidential election. And you're going to see a lot of movement in marijuana because the Democrats especially know that if marijuana is on the ballot, young people come out and vote. Example, Florida, marijuana was on the ballot. More young people came out and voted for marijuana than for the governor in the last election. Unfortunately, there was a threshold of like 51%, but now they're doing that over without the threshold, so marijuana is going to pass in Florida, I'm sure, this time around.
So it's a generational thing. Younger people are more accepting. No
question about it. CNN did a poll. 70% of the country wants to legalize marijuana. 30 and younger, that number jumps to 92%. So yeah, it's definitely a generational thing, and it's definitely, it will be national. There's no question about it. And the main reason is tax dollars. Colorado has a population of about LA County. Colorado did over $300 million in tax revenue the first quarter this year. And of course, that's enough to pay off their whole school bill. So you're looking at states like Michigan and Illinois and New York here. They're all going to pass it.
And I think Colorado even brought in more money, tax revenue, than expected, and they had to write everybody a check.
So these other states that are hemorrhaging, Florida with seniors, New York with everything, and they're definitely going to pass this. When I first got involved, I didn't know people even smoked marijuana anymore, never mind $100 billion. So it's a staggering amount of people out there that still smoke. And it is. It's very similar because FDR, when he rescinded the False Act, there was a lot of pressure for him to reinstall it the next year, but he saw the tax revenue, he said, forget about it. We need this, because they were in the heights of the Depression. And the same here. I mean, even though the market's doing good, the economy's really doing pretty bad here in the United States.
So tell me a little bit more about Diego. Will this be medicinal, recreational, both, high-end? How is it all going to work?
We want to be a brand where we're going to go across the country. We're not just going to be a head shop or just exclusive to, you know, Washington or Seattle or Colorado and Denver. We're going to go across the country. We want to be really, one of our founders, Doug Anderson, calls us the Starbucks of marijuana.
Diego was based on a concept of quality, premium, consistent marijuana to be sold at a retail level.
So when it comes to securing real estate, it's actually a lot harder than it sounds.
There's a lot of rules, and oddly those rules or those laws change from state to state. But a good example that's pretty consistent in all the states is you have to be within 1,000 feet of any schools. You can't have a store or a production facility within 1,000 feet of a school. You can't have retail stores within 1,000 feet of each other. The closest comparison I think I could make to it would be the liquor stores. You'll find that in a lot of states where the liquor stores will have those kinds of confinements.
So where does your revenue come from?
Our revenue initially comes from the leasing of the properties, very similar to a landlord. What we'll do is we'll go into markets like we have, Colorado, Washington, Oregon. We'll secure the real estate, best real estate that we can find, using the experts that we have, and we'll build those spaces out per the Diego qualifications. Again, we're always stressing quality, and then we lease them back to the tenants. And so we'll make our profit through the rents of the space. In addition, we also have Diego designed and manufactured products, as well as some private label products.
So what does Diego look like 5 years from now?
You know, I think 5 years from now we'll be a very substantial company. I think we'll rival that of major tobacco and major alcohol companies.
When do you think the law is going to allow you to do that?
Simplest answer for me, and I've done a lot of projections based on this, is somewhere around 2018, 2019. And depending who you ask, they'll say, yeah, I'm right, or I'm way off. The reason I say that is the states are falling one by one. A big state's going to fall, in my opinion, in 2016, which is California. You know, California is the largest marijuana market in the world. I mean, it's going to be tremendous tax benefits to that state. I think when those tax revenues start to flow through the government and they see the amount of money that they can raise for schools and various things that these states need, it'll be hard for them to deny that progress.
Can you hold out until then? Can you make enough money until then?
We can, and actually that's what makes separates our model from some of our other competitors. We're a complete model. As I mentioned, we're a branding company, we're a real estate company, and we're also a merchandise company. And all the models we've ran allow us to function and be profitable until legalization happens. That's why we didn't just build the company around marijuana. We knew we had to bring in fundamentals, business fundamentals, to sustain the company. When the time comes, literally overnight, we can move from just being a branding, real estate, merchandise company to being a fully integrated marijuana company from seed to sell.
And the good news is, I have to tell you, when you Google premium marijuana, Diego is the first result that pops up.
That's correct.
The bad news is there's also some not so favorable press attention.
Correct.
So I wanted you to address that.
I get asked questions about the subpoena quite often, and it's really unfortunate. I'm not sure. We made the decision as a company to put out in the Super 8K that we had received a subpoena. I think there's a lot of companies out there that have made the decision not to that have. And I'll quantify that a little bit. You know, when we received the subpoena, first of all, we were not the target of an investigation. We were asked to supply emails and information in regards to a transaction we had done with another publicly traded company, and it was a branding transaction. But because of the nature of the other company and its business outside the United States, I think that was enough that caused the inquiry from us. We fulfilled the request on the subpoena. We never heard another word. No, not another set of questions, no more requests. It's been over, I think, a year and a half ago.
So I'm here with Doug Anderson, founder of Diego Pellicer. You guys want to be premium, the best of the best.
I think that's a good place to start. I think that this sector is screaming for quality, and I think that the consumer in this sector, there's a broad spectrum out there.
So what is the profile of your customer?
Well, you know, it's tempting to say that, oh, we want the wealthy or what have you. And of course, you know, disposable income is great. But I think the true demographic is people that appreciate quality and, you know, as long as that person respects themselves and will respect the product, that's our customer. You know, if it's a guy who wants to get a cheap high and get wasted, he's not our customer, or she. I think we're going to have a terrific opportunity to do that, especially because of the strategic locations that early on we acquired. For example, our store in Seattle, that location is the highest volume, legally compliant real estate location for retail in that region. 33,200 cars per day go by that location. It's a standalone building with parking, a few blocks from the football stadium, baseball stadium, Starbucks headquarters. So, you know, a couple times a week, 70,000 plus people milling about that area. It's Tailgate Central, a perfect spot for us to broadcast our brand. And I think we cast a wide net if we handle those customers with good service, efficient service, and quality products that you can trust.
And when it comes to the product and the method of delivery, this is all going to be luxury.
I think there's an overabundance of adolescent-like spin to a lot of the products, and I think that that can be polished and refined and appreciated in this sector. One of the provisionally patented products we have is called Varita. Varita means wand in Spanish. Let's look at today's state of the art. State of the art today, I stick something in my mouth that looks like a smoldering sock. I suck on it, and then I give it to you, and you kiss me by proxy and catch my cold, and then pass it to somebody else.
Not very luxury sounding.
Yeah, I mean, what other consumable do we do that with? I mean, do I do that with a beer or a coffee or a cigar? Of course not. This one's mine. This one's yours. If you want another, I'll be happy to give it to you. And so I think that kind of thing is going to change. Varita is a reloadable and a preloaded disposable answer to the modern joint. So you've got a pre-pressed cone of cannabis that you can put in there. You've got the dose down, you know how much you're consuming. And on our disposable model, when you're finished with it, the thing becomes a golf tee. So, you know, if you happen to be on a course and you need that extra tea, there it is for you.
What makes you think that marijuana smokers will care about the brand? Or how are you going to make them care?
You know, I'll tell you, to me, this is not quantum mechanics. Everyone loves and appreciates quality and luxury. And if you open the door, they will come in. And you know, the challenge isn't presenting it to them. The challenge is the consistency. And that's where we cannot sit down, we cannot rest. We constantly have to do what we can to innovate, improve, and be better. Never before in business history has a market of this size been in existence with no brands. I mean, markets come into existence with no brands all the time, but in existence, this size and no brands. The closest analogy we can find is the end of alcohol prohibition. And those brands that came out first took off, never looked back, and they still exist today. And it's interesting to note, gin like Gordon's, that was Joseph Kennedy. Pabst, Rockefeller was involved with, Seagram's, Ford was involved with those guys. Those last two guys didn't even drink.
And those brands are still with us today?
They took off, they never looked back, they still exist today.
So Dr. Osborne, tell me about your role with the company.
Well, I'm on the advisory board from the point of view of the medical aspects of cannabis.
Are you just putting cancer cells and the active components of cannabis in a petri dish and seeing what happens?
Well, I think it's very early days to talk about prevention. I think CBD, which is the product that has very few psychotropic effects and seems to have many of the medical effects, would be a very interesting agent to test in the laboratory to see whether taking that can reduce your chances of cancer.
And what does the timeline look like?
Well, this is work that could be started fairly rapidly once the partners in doing the research are identified. This kind of work is very difficult to do in the United States. So we're looking at two options. One is to do the research through the auspices of President Vicente Fox of Mexico, who put us in touch with the National University of Mexico in Mexico City. One other alternative is to consider using one of the sovereign nation Indian tribes in the state of Washington, who've been granted license to grow and purify the compounds in cannabis.
And are there specific cancers that you're focusing on, or would this work across the board with all cancers?
Well, we're selecting out of the major, the commonest adult cancers, breast cancer first and foremost, but we're also very interested in prostate cancer and colon cancer. We're not so interested in cervical cancer and lung cancer, where the causes of those and the prevention of those is known. And that's not such a great issue. They would be worth looking at, but they are certainly second tier. I think breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer are the first candidates to evaluate.
Now, we talked about the possible preventative angle. What about the pharmaceutical application with this research?
Well, the medical research is very well established. The use of cannabis medically in situations such as chronic pain, mitigating the side effects of cancer chemotherapy, the use of it in multiple sclerosis, for example. The list is ever growing longer of diseases. You could add more recently inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis. The papers are coming out fairly fast showing encouraging effects and benefits. And mostly this is, of course, being used where the first-line medical treatments have ended up failing, as they often do with chronic diseases, and they've reached their end of what the physicians can do with standard drug treatment, pharmaceutical treatment. I think particularly in the area of pain, particularly worldwide, not just within the United States, but there's a tremendous shortage of narcotics in the underdeveloped world. Yet here is a very easily obtained and inexpensive remedy for mitigating pain to some degree.
And yet the government still classifies it as a Schedule I drug, which means it has no medical benefits, right?
Yes, it's incomprehensible to me with the amount of data that's in the literature now, in the medical literature, that it should be classified as Schedule I, which is a drug that has absolutely no medical benefit, period. There is medical benefit to cannabis, and it has no business to be scheduled as a Schedule I drug. And
is there any harm, any side effects? I mean, we know with traditional pharmaceuticals, there are always side effects.
Yes, there are always side effects. I think the safety profile of cannabis compared to alcohol, they just don't compare. You cannot take an overdose of cannabis. It's almost impossible. You'd have to take it in a very concentrated, extracted form to have any serious side effect. And as a drug treatment goes, it's remarkably free of toxicity.
So we've already talked a little bit about the medical benefits, but there's a recent study that you have come across.
Yes, a study published from the Harvard School of Public Health, which is arguably one of the best in the world, looked at men followed for a very long period of time and looked at those who smoked cannabis and those who were not smoking cannabis. And they found in the cannabis smokers that they had much lower body weight. There was much less obesity. There was also indications that it might be protective against diabetes. And of course, if it is protective against obesity to any degree, we know that diabetes, heart disease, and cancer are all related to obesity.
So Dr. Epstein, Diego Pellicer's goal is to be the best of the best. How do you help them do that?
My expertise is in quality assurance and quality control, and expertise in product specifications. I was contacted several years ago by Doug Anderson when I was retiring of an interest in helping them deal with specifications on products, especially cannabis. And my background was also in forensic science.
I imagine that would be very important when it comes to this kind of product.
Any product that you manufacture is very important. If you can't reproduce your product, have an identity of your product and specifications of your product and what it entails, you might be able to sell it the first time, but you're never going to sell it the second or third time.
So I guess information is power, right? So if you were to find something, what kind of an edge could it give the company?
To give you one example, I spoke to one party that had a better way to macerate the product, make it into a more fine material, and a way to encapsulate it and deliver it as an actual chemical. So my response was I spoke with them and looked at the research they've had, but actually, more importantly, have they applied it to other products and what the success was in other products. Another example was looking at a novel way of actually extracting cannabis. That's a cleaner process that gives you perhaps less byproduct.
So when we were speaking earlier, you also talked to me about keeping abreast of all the trends on what's going on worldwide when it comes to cannabis. How does that knowledge help this company? What are the potential implications there?
Very difficult process to manage scientific principles. And cannabis, of course, is a product of nature, which has active chemicals and other constituents. And therefore, it's quite important for any company to have a knowledge base on what the product is, how it's grown, and any new research that might be happening regarding cannabis as a product.
Give me an example. Say you find out about a new extraction process. What kind of an edge could that give to the company?
At this point, there are many ways to extract oil out of cannabis. There are scientists out there or entrepreneurs that are looking for better ways to produce a product and more efficiently, and a product that's more reproducible. So if they make contact with Diego Pellicer, they generally put them in contact with me through a phone conversation or sometimes face-to-face, and we talk about the work they've done, its applications, and I will then get back to Diego Pellicer as where that really stands, if it needs more work to be done, or perhaps we should talk with them again in the future.
So then Diego Pellicer is really cutting edge then. They already have you on board looking at all of this.
When you have a product that has active chemical components, you also have to have a scientific plan for the product itself. That means an assay for the active ingredients, an assay for other chemical constituents that you're making medical claims for, to ensure that the incipients, those that are not active, occur in the same order and composition, that the product also would meet specifications requiring any activity of water, which might be a fertile system for growing bacteria, and issues involving pathogens, pesticide use, or other things that actually will define a product for its safety.
Before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add about Diego or the industry?
I've been on the floor 35 years trading. I was early in Google. I was early in Apple. I tried to get early in Starbucks. But my partner at the time, remember this is going back 20 years ago, he said, who's going to pay, at that time, $2 for a cup of coffee? He said, walk away, it's not going to work. And I've heard that with Diego. Who's going to pay premium for Diego? Well, they will. I mean, if you had gotten involved in Starbucks, you could be a multimillionaire. If you had bought 100 shares of Starbucks when it was listed, that same value would now be worth, like, I think it was $32,000. Wow. So, I mean, it's just quadrupled in value. And I see Diego doing that, easily doing that.
So how can someone get involved as an early investor in the cannabis industry?
Well, we're a listed company. You can definitely get involved with us. You can definitely buy our stock over the counter. That's not a problem.
What's the ticker symbol?
Diego Pellicer worldwide. It trades at about $2 a share, in that range. But remember, this thing is going to eventually take off. Right now, it's in its conception. It's very small, very light trading at the moment. But we expect this to really kick up. You're going to see, like I said, you're going to see big changes in marijuana this year. You're going to see a lot of states taking on. Diego's out there. A lot of people know we're out there. So they're looking for something to invest in. And you can invest in us in Diego worldwide. If you live in those particular states, and you can invest locally. Now remember, Diego worldwide doesn't actually touch the plant. We have nothing to do with the plant, because that'd be breaking federal laws. But we do rent, and we're tied into them in that way. Backdoor, more or less. But we do not touch marijuana. We do not sell marijuana as of yet. But once it goes off and becomes federally legal, then we get involved totally. But it's a good way to get in if you don't live in those states.
Sure.
It's a real smart way to get in.
And you're early in the space that is growing. Are there competitors? Are there others trying to do what you're doing?
There's competitors, but again, it's a $100 billion a year business in the shadows. So there's a lot of room. But there's no one doing what we're doing, a high-end brand type of national brand. No one's doing that in the marijuana field, as far as I know. I haven't seen anyone out there.